Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were Lifejacked.
What do you do when a cancer diagnosis attempts to derail all your hopes and dreams? My name is Dr. Rowe, and this is Lifejacked, the Resilience Podcast. Lifejacked is when an unfortunate or unplanned event happens to jack with your life. My guest for this week, Savio P. Clemente, who was born in Mumbai, India, grew up in the suburbs of New York after his family relocated to the United States when he was just 3 years old. His journey has led him to become a recent TEDx speaker, media journalist, and a board-certified wellness coach, as well as a best-selling author. His mission revolves around empowering individuals to share their stories in order to amplify their impact and cultivate a healthy, wealthy, and wise lifestyle. His resilience story revolves around his battle with stage 3 cancer. This experience was a profound test of his resilience, challenging him physically, emotionally, mentally, relationally, and spiritually. It prompted him to embark on a journey of self-discovery and transformation, where he learned to love his inner stranger, the parts of himself he had previously neglected or rejected. This journey not only helped him navigate the challenges of cancer, but also empowered him to embrace his authentic self and live life with purpose and passion. Hi, Savio. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
Oh, Dr. Rowe, what a beautiful intro. I'm well. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm so looking forward to having this discussion with you today.
Yes, most definitely. That you have said that your professional life was fraught with hurdles of acceptance, confusion, and following paths that many in your social circle feared to tread. What exactly does that mean?
You know, I grew up, I came to the United States when I was 3 years old. I was a very, very sensitive child. I have 2 older sisters. We're all 3 years apart. And I just always felt different on many levels, just relating to other people. I had a stuttering impediment for most of my elementary school years. In high school, I had social anxiety. Like, I'm just someone who always felt like I needed to rely on self and my own inner wisdom in order to garner or in order to understand what life was throwing my way. And so for me, that involved, even though I went to college, a 4-year college, and I studied information systems and business administration, I always was someone who just liked to experiment and do different things. I constantly was jumping between, that was the dot-com era back in the late 90s, and so I was part of that whole swath and wave, and my parents never really understood me in terms of why I wanted to just explore and see the world. I went to Australia and solo trip, and I just did all these things that most people would scoff at or say you're not following a very Asian, Indian, traditional life. And I always just really felt for myself that something was guiding me or calling me. I didn't know how to even accept that fully or how to even articulate that. I grew up Catholic, but I was someone who was just a voracious learner. And so I explored different belief systems, to the dismay of my parents. I'm also openly gay, and so that was like a big deal in my household to be of that persuasion. And so I just really looked at life as just a smorgasbord of experiences that I wanted to invest in.
Wow, how brave you are. I know it's difficult at times to be the outlier, if you will, but incredibly brave though. It's hard to go against the grain of what society thinks you should be, like you said, as an Asian Indian person, and I have experienced that as well as an African American woman and also a Latina. And it's just like, yeah, I'm different. This is who I am, and people look at you strange. Have you felt like sometimes people look at you kind of strange, like, what is your deal?
Absolutely. I mean, now people have massive respect for me because I have this badge called Cancer Survivor that, really erases all the other things that I went through my life. But I really felt to a large degree that people also knew that there was something different about me. And it doesn't have to be just based around my sexuality, just generally how I saw things and how I experienced things and how I articulated things. I just was like on a tangent. I just was just someone who really believed that we're here. We don't know how long we're here on this planet. And it's really our job to try to look through the baggage that we came with and also try to sort it out and organize it and try to make sense of it. And so it was just something that I couldn't, like I said, articulate, but something that was just like an inner knowing. I almost felt like a guiding force that was guiding me towards understanding all that. I, to this day, am still understanding all that, but it's just something that was just very confusing at the time. But now, in retrospect and looking back, it was a godsend, actually.
Well, I love your perspective. It's not a lot of people have the courage to say, we don't have a lot of time here. Sometimes people don't really think about that. And so I'm sure, the moment that you received your diagnosis with stage 3 cancer, although you have this optimistic, wonderful outlook on life, but how did that initially impact your life?
Oh, wow. So that was in July of 2014. So this July of 2024 will be 10 years since I got diagnosed.
Oh, wow.
It came fast and furious. Yeah, it came fast and furious. I was with a friend. We were in London, Amsterdam, Paris. And I kept noticing I had these drenching nights. And it was like I just chalked it up to just being in a different location, environment, different foods. Came home, I had the drenching night sweats, and then my stomach started getting distended. And at that time in my life, I was just someone who really didn't even take aspirin. But I was seeing a naturopath who was analyzing my blood work and actually telling me what diet structure and vitamins to take. I was seeing him for a good 8 to 10 years. And he said to me, Savio, based upon what I see, my friend, it could be a few things. I really suggest you should go to get mainstream. And he's like, get a sonogram. I'm like, what are you talking about? Get a sonogram. I'm like, okay. I get a sonogram. They wouldn't let me be at the office for 8 hours. And they finally came out, told me to get a relative to come pick me up. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I drove here. They're like, nope. So I ended up going to the hospital. My dad came, and within an hour, they transferred me to the 5th floor. And later that night, I overheard nurses speaking that they were going to transfer me to the 7th floor, which they call the cancer floor. So that's how I initially knew. I didn't know what kind of cancer. No one gave me the information, but I knew that it wasn't looking good.
Wow. So to go from a person who barely even wants to take an aspirin, and then now you are transported to the 7th floor, which is the cancer floor. So I'm sure there were like huge physical, emotional, and mental challenges you face, because now you have to have treatment for something, and that involves support and, injections of all types of medicines and medication and all these things. So talk about, like, what was that experience like?
Yeah, so that night, I'm someone who doesn't really show a lot of emotion to strangers. And so I just remember really tearing up and crying to a nurse who was there, because for me, I always believed and I always knew deep down that there's something greater than this physical existence. I don't know what it is. I can't really articulate it. I don't think any of us really can fully say what that is, but it was an inner knowing. But for me, it wasn't about that. It was about, am I disappointing people? Am I disappointing myself? Did I finish what I came here to do? What more did I not accomplish? So I felt all these floods of emotion, like shame and fear, and obviously I felt vulnerability. And when I got transferred to the 7th floor that next morning, they had to do a nephrostomy. They had to put a nephrostomy tube in my stomach because I ended up having ascites, which that's why my stomach was growing. And so they had to distend about 8 liters of fluid from my abdomen. And when they put the nephrostomy tube is when one of the surgeons whispered in my ear and said, fortunately, it's lymphoma. But he said, if there's a cancer to get, this is the cancer to get, which I thought was strange, but that's what he said. Literally, for a week, I was bedridden because of the nephrostomy tube, and then I was in the hospital for an additional 7 days. And 3 days before I had to leave, the medical director came to me. She said, listen, we know your health history. We've talked to you many, many times, but I'm telling you now, you need to get your first round of chemo. And if you don't, I don't know what's going to happen to you. I said, really? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So I ended up trusting into a really good friend of mine who I've known for a really long time. And I had a conversation with her on the phone. She goes, Savio, are you sure you want to get chemo? Because it ravages the good and the bad. And I said to her, you know what, you're right. I don't know what to do. And it's really interesting, Dr. Rowe, because, sometimes when you're pushed to the metal, something triggers within you. And I had this insight, this recall, this vision of seeing a movie back in the early 90s with Keanu Reeves. It was called Little Buddha. He played Siddhartha, which is the young Buddha. He gave up all his possessions in the movie as the Buddha. And he was meditating. 2 other individuals literally living on 1 grain of rice a day. And he overhears 2 individuals tell this story all the time because it's so impactful. Because people often think that you make decisions like it's thought of beforehand, but something like this, when it enters your life, really allows you to dig deeper. And I think the insight was very profound for me. So in the scene, there was an older gentleman and a younger gentleman on a fishing boat. And the older gentleman says to the younger person that he's holding an instrument. He goes, if you hold the string too tight, it will snap. And if you leave it too slack, it won't play. The path is the middle way. And I'm like, oh my God. So it's like a flash of insight. I'm like, oh, I can do chemo, but yet I can do a whole bunch of integrative modalities, which I did. So the story goes, I did 6 rounds of chemo every 3 weeks. So I did first round in the hospital, 5 other rounds. My dad wanted to come visit me to get chemo treatments. I'm like, Dad, you staring at me for 5 to 6 hours, it's not going to really help me. It's going to make me more self-conscious. But he did pick me up. And beyond that, the other 3 weeks, I did a whole bunch, high and low. I set a Google alert for myself on my disease, and I did everything from energy medicine to ozone therapy. I researched it all because I believe wholeheartedly in body autonomy, especially when it comes to a disease like cancer. And fortunately, the story goes for me that in 4.5 months of doing both the chemo and the integrative modalities, I was able to beat my diagnosis. And this past December of 2023, 9 years in remission. I got my remission status 5 days before Christmas that day.
Well, hallelujah for that. And talk about being Lifejacked. I mean, you were just traveling the world. and you
right?
Up in the cancer floor, and now you got to do 6 chemo. Yeah, that's definitely Lifejacked. I can tell you that.
Well, especially since when most people think, like, when you're told you have cancer, at least nowadays, you have some time to think, right? Reevaluate, get a second opinion. I had none of that. It was fast and furious. So, and then
Wow.
most people, when they have a cancer diagnosis, as stage 3 was mine, they're like, okay, I got to do things that I've never done before. But I did that like as a precursor to even getting the diagnosis. So I don't know what that was all about, but I'm here today, and I felt called and a mission that after 5 years being in remission, which is never guaranteed, but it's less likely to occur, that I was going to do something with it. And that's really the trajectory of what I'm building and what I'm creating.
I love it. I love it. Now, you seem like a person who's totally in tune to yourself, right? So, but on your cancer journey, it led you to this concept of loving your inner stranger. So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So that idea, so that particular phraseology was something that I use in my TEDx talk. So I did a TEDx talk in Raleigh, North Carolina this past October. It was published in the end of December. It has a really good reception. And people keep asking me, what are you talking about? Honestly, Ro, that day, those 15 days in the hospital was when I touched that inner stranger, because I saw the Savio that was dying physically. That was stage 3 with all the things hooked up to him. Now he has to get chemo. But I also saw these other parts of me, like my mental acuity was still there. I was researching and looking up information about my disease. I was connecting with people. My emotional self was there. I was talking with people and having really heartfelt conversations. My relational aspect with my family, came to visit me. It was still alive. My dreams were vivid. So I felt like the inner stranger for me was those parts of me that was the shame and the vulnerability that I didn't want to see. And people keep asking me, well, why, what do you mean the inner stranger? And I'm like, I kept it nebulous on purpose. I want you to know what that means to you. What is the inner stranger to me? Some people have expressed the inner stranger as this idea that it's something greater than what they want to achieve, but they just don't find a way to do it because they don't believe in themselves as much, or the inner stranger is those parts in childhood. And it's not the inner critic or the shadow or that inner child. It's really those parts of you that really are trying to propel you forward, but somehow you just can't seem to go forward because, as a good friend once told me, the only way through something is through discomfort. We can't go around discomfort. We can't go over discomfort. We have to go through it. And so for me, I always urge people to look at the inner stranger as something that might feel uncomfortable. It might be a foe initially. It could always be.
You said we have something, there's 7 energy centers. So what are
Yes,
these?
yes.
What are these 7 energy centers, and how did they play a role in your healing?
Sure. So it goes back to the cancer situation. So even though I was Catholic and I studied that, and I was an altar boy for many, many years in elementary school, I also studied various belief systems from Buddhism to higher spiritualism to just contemporary spiritualism. And for me, 7 energy centers is, if you study yoga, it's really, they call it the chakras. I make it very simple for people. It's just really mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, soul, astral, which is, your dreams, those areas of your life, and trying to find ways for people to unearth those things and look at those things and shine a light to those things, and to a large degree release some of those things that are holding you back. And so I call it 7 energy centers. Along with that, I have something that I call the 3 brains, which is the head, heart, and gut, because there is anecdotal evidence that those 3 areas of your body, they give off some level of knowingness, of consciousness, of awakening, or some level of understanding. And so in conjunction, that's really the coaching that I do, is try to get people. Right now, in the beginning, it was this idea of working with cancer survivors. And right now, because of my speaking and the TEDx, I had a whole new wide reception about working with individuals who have overcome some level of medical adversity, for them to realize their greatness to a degree and also become unstoppable leaders in that, to actually be forerunners in what they want to create in life.
I love that you mentioned yoga. I'm a big advocate of yoga and Zen and being centered with yourself, and because it all is connected. So did mindfulness meditation play a role in your journey towards resilience through this process?
100%. So before cancer came into my life, I was a long-time meditator. At that point in my life, probably about 15 years straight meditating every day. Started off with 2 or 3 minutes, and then I worked my way up to 20 minutes a day. That definitely helped because I was very conscious of what was happening to me, and the doctors had to do a bone marrow aspiration. Apparently, I didn't know up until that point, but they kept telling me, 2 of them, that it's really painful, and people have kicked, screamed, spat at us, yelled expletives, done horrible things to us, but we're okay with it. So whatever you do, we're totally fine. Yeah, I was sweating profusely, and they looked at me, they're like, okay, this is very strange. They're like, we've done this, unfortunately, hundreds of times for people, and your reaction was just so different. And I looked at them like, Doc, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to just crumble here? You're here to help me heal, and I'm here to try to help you help me heal. So me giving you resistance in any form or fashion is not going to help this process along. So do what you need to do, and I'll do what I need to do. And they were like, wow. And then I'm like, and I think that really bolstered their ability to want to tend to me. I counted, I had about 19 doctors. Different doctors, and I don't know why that happened, but it did. And I felt very nurtured in the space because I had at the time 4 roommates throughout the 15 days. 2 of them had brain cancer. and they had to go get radiation, do all these things. One of the individuals, the last roommate I had, kept yelling and screaming at the nurses, yelling at the doctors. And when they left, I asked him, I said, listen, I don't know you, but can I just ask, like, because he wanted to go home, even though he had a radiation appointment the next day. And I'm like, what do you want to get home for? And he's like, I want to see my dog. So when he left the room, I talked to a friend, and she's like, Savio, you don't get it. I'm like, what do you mean? Because you're a different type of mentality. You have a different type of understanding with this. He's afraid he's going to die. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. It took that compassion, empathy for me to understand where people are coming from. I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much for this lesson. So even when I was in the hospital, I knew that I have a connection with these people on the 7th floor, this cancer floor, that there's something here that I need to understand and learn. And if it doesn't go my way, at least I can say I tried to understand.
Now, I know that we have one brain. There's only one brain that I know about. But you talk about 3 brains, right? And there are 3 brains. And so what is this all about, and how did that contribute to your level of resilience?
Yeah, so that was years after my cancer situation, just learning and studying. I'm a board-certified wellness coach, so I studied everything from positive psychology to just self-regulation to social support theory, all these wonderful things that are out in the world for us to understand or get a better grip of people. Now, some people argue that the 3 brains are the 3 sections of a physical brain, the thinking brain. But the 3 brains that I sort of coined are these areas of the body. And if you do research and you understand that they give off a resonance of knowingness, apparently the heart, according to some research, does give off more of a knowingness than even the thinking brain. It really controls not only our emotions, but controls our actions in terms of deciding what it is that we want to do, and then we rely on that actual brain in order to do it. Now, this is a lot of people will argue and say, no, but just do a test for yourself and just try to calm, take a deep breath in, and ask yourself a question, and try to separate the different areas of your body in answering that question. So obviously, we first go with the thinking brain. We go with that whole, okay, what should I do? Yes, no, maybe, what's the possibility? But actually, I urge people to go and look and go deep within the heart and try to see if the heart has an answer for that particular question. And this was very prominent because at this point in my career and what I do, I've interviewed 200 cancer survivors, different walks of life, different types of cancers. And one of the most profound questions in my interviews with them was, if cancer had a message for you, what would that message be? And a lot of people were like, what are you talking about? Like, it's a big, bad wolf. I want to get it away from me. But then if they look within the heart, some of them actually saw in going through their cancer journey, there was great meaning in that. There was great lessons in that. There was something about that experience that they saw as something that helped their life move forward. And then obviously the gut brain, there's whole big research on microbiome and the gut and all that. So I just really coined it as making it very simple. Head, heart, and gut, call it the 3 brains.
Wow. Now, would you mind elaborating on your Aloha reboot and how this helps in building resilience and leading a very fulfilling life?
Yeah, it's really something that beyond the 7 energy centers, the 3 brains, it's this Aloha reboot that I work with my clients on. And it really was underscored in my TEDx talk, which is called 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And in it, I have a framework or something called the Aloha reboot, 7 minutes a day. So A stands for acknowledge. Acknowledge where you are in the present moment. L stands for listening. So listen to that inner voice. A large part of this derivative that I used was based on something called Huna healing. It's a Hawaiian healing methodology. And off that, there's an offshoot called Ho'oponopono. And Ho'oponopono leads me to the O in Aloha, which is opening. So open yourself up to self-compassion and self-forgiveness. H stands for harnessing, so harness that wisdom from within. And A stands for acting. So take that and act with intention and purpose. And that's called the Aloha reboot. 7 minutes a day, that's all you need. And it's a great takeaway because people don't forget that they have to come to self in order to come to other people. People often I don't understand them. I don't understand what's going on. But you have to first understand yourself in order to understand other people. And with that, I really lead people towards the end of my TED Talk with talking about the singular thread throughout everything that I do, which is To know thyself is to heal thyself. It's not a quote that I formed. It's a quote. It's an ancient quote that I learned and I understood its true meaning going through the process and going through the pain and the purpose of what I went through.
Well, you hear that, listeners? You heard it directly from Savio P. Clemente, the Aloha reboot and practical steps. Acknowledge, listen, open yourself up, harness, and take action. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Now, looking back, how has this journey of self-discovery and transformation changed your perspective on life and being resilient?
I think the central theme in all this is really this idea of story. So I was on a panel, and it was not my audience. It was stage 4 prostate cancer patients. That's it. They tried every treatment. Unfortunately, it is what it is. And one of them asked me a question, and I could have just agreed with him and nodded, but I said, if I had magic powers and I waved a magic wand and took away your cancer right now, it's totally gone, what would you do? And he's like, he rattled off 3 or 4 different things. And I'm like, okay. Well, with that, is there anything in those 4 things or 5 things that you mentioned that you could just have a tiny step towards doing? He goes, yeah, I could do that. And he says, why? And I said, because no one at the end of the day knows, right? Doctors look at charts, they look at data, they look at science. Wonderful, beautiful. But they don't really know, right? It's not over until it's over. And at the end of the day, you can still create, you can still do. There's always hope. And at the end of the day, I told him as well, you own your story. You're with a whole bunch of prostate cancer patients. Your story is a whole lot different. That's something no one can take away from you. So I would say the central theme is know your story and be able to be comfortable in expressing that story, because your story can move mountains, not only for yourself.
In your opinion, what are the best ways to build resilience?
I would say the best ways to build resilience is really, people often think of it as bouncing back and you got to go forward and you got to go, and those are all true and right and correct and wonderful. But resilience to me is really the understanding, this idea of gratitude with resilience. It's understanding, well, that happened to me, and yes, I can move forward and go forward. And my family was really gung-ho. They said, Savio, if anyone can beat this, you can beat this. And I loved their confidence in me, but it was an added pressure. I felt pressure. So I just made sure for myself that I focused like a laser beam on my healing. I let everything else go into my, off of my life, and I said, okay, healing is my next 6 months. That's what I'm going to do. And so I think when it comes to resilience is really trying to understand, what are you fighting for? What do you want to be grateful for from the experience? What is the experience trying to teach you to be grateful for? So it's answering or asking these questions that are deeply rooted, and they're not easy to answer. But to me, resilience is really about seeing that vision, that greater vision, and not a goal, but a vision of how you want to be and how you want to feel. So it's really about just allowing yourself to be present, but also be future focused in the sense that you can understand why you're reaching for that particular goal point.
Well, Savio, you are incredibly wise and definitely resilient. Thank you so much for your time. Can you let everyone know how they can either seek you for wellness coaching or get your book, I Survived Cancer, and Here is How I Did It? 35 cancer survivors share their journey.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. So everyone can find me on my website. So it's Savio P. Clemente. It's SavioPClemente.com. I have a weekly newsletter where I talk about the 3 brains. I cover different wellness experiences, interviews with Venus Williams and Ice-T, and beautiful trips to India and Italy covering wellness retreats. But I also talk about the real stuff happening. Like I recently covered the red carpet at the Oscars. And the title of that post was, Do I Belong in a Sea of Hollywood's Elites? And I really want people to really think deep down. So that's on the website. My book obviously is on the website. You can actually look at other podcasts and listen to them. My season 4 of my podcast is coming out soon as well. You can see my TEDx talk on that website as well. And then on social media, I can be found on every platform at The Human Resolve. And of course, my website also has my coaching that I do, which is focused on all of us overcoming some level of adversity or medical adversity in our lives. And what's the next stage? How do we go from the version that we are into leaders that we want to be and people that we want to express?
Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
I would say asking that central question is really important about what can you control and what can't you control. Like cancer came to me, there was not really much I could do in the hospital bed except look at information and try to be as positive and buoyant as possible in other ways. But it's really figuring out for yourself, okay, this happened to me. So how do I respond? Do I respond with the same amount of energy and curiosity, even though I'm fearful, I'm angry, sad, and I'm afraid? That's the central key for me. It's really figuring out for yourself what can you control and what can you not control. So I really ask your listeners to really dig deep down, use the Aloha reboot in order to do that, and find ways that you can cultivate a better relationship with yourself. Because at the end of the day, we only take ourselves in and we take ourselves out.
Well, Savio, I wish you and your family nothing but blessings and abundance. Thank you so much for being a guest. Please take care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rowe.
You have just listened to Lifejacked, the Resilience Podcast with your host, Dr. Rowe. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, and any other podcast streaming platform. Remember to live, laugh, love, learn, and then repeat. See you in the next episode.